I'm not sure when a house becomes a home. For me, the moment it truly becomes ours is when the first child's laughter bounces off the walls and every meal tastes like a promise. My name is Nia Okafor, and this is the story of how a place once full of light nearly turned me into a stranger in my own life. I grew up where the streets hummed with stories and the corners held elders who could tell you tomorrow's weather by listening to the wind. My mother was a seamstress, my father a bus driver, and together they stitched hope through every paycheck and late-night shift. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and in that simple yes to life, we learned how to make something out of nothing. When I turned 26, I stood in a small loan office with a yellow-brown lease in my hand and a stack of nerves in my chest. The loan officer's smile was careful, almost embarrassed, like she knew a storm was waiting beyond the counters and would rather we didn't notice. I signed for a tiny 3-bedroom house on a quiet street where the maple trees wore red leaves like a crown in the fall. The day I walked in, the walls seemed to lean in as if to whisper, "Welcome home, child." It wasn't home yet, but I believed it would be. I raised 2 kids in that house, Molly and little Jax, who insisted on calling me boss, the way kids do when they want to pretend they're grown. Molly learned to ride her bike on the cracked driveway, and Jax learned to tell a joke so sharp it could slice through a bad mood. We learned to fill the spaces with music and the colors of our laughter. Neighbors knew our names, and we knew theirs. The old woman who watered her roses at dawn, the barber who gave free shaves to the neighborhood kids, the couple who ran the corner market with a smile that could light up a whole block. Then life shuffled its cards. A new wind began to blow, and with it came a promise that sounded generous. "Let us help you." It came through a cousin who said, "People like us deserve a bigger stage, a bigger house, a bigger life." And it came wearing the gleam of opportunity. The kind that slides in as if it's blessing but leaves footprints when you least expect it. The offer landed like a feather on a cliff. A larger home in a more affluent part of town, a mortgage with low rates and flexible terms, a future glimmering with possibility. I told myself I deserved it, that a woman who had spent her life giving everything to her children deserved to dream a little bigger. The words tasted sweet at first, the way a new season tastes when you're willing to believe the forecast. What I didn't see was the price behind the promise. The new house came with a different kind of chorus. The chorus of quiet judgments and people's eyes then not meeting mine, their glances saying, "You're not supposed to want this." The new neighborhood felt louder, brighter, and less safe in the ways a neighborhood becomes when it's no longer your own. The first winter in the new place, Molly called me in the kitchen, a tremor in her voice. "Mama, we found a way to make this easier for you." She spoke as though she carried all the burdens in the room like a magician who could conjure relief with a simple spell. I was tired. My body carried the weight of years of service. Shifts that bled into mornings I never saw awake, late-night tears over deadlines and bills. The quiet prayers I whispered when no one was looking. And I believed the vision they painted. That a new home would take care of me. That I could finally sit down, breathe, and watch the world slow to a patient pace. But the moment the key turned in the lock of the new house's front door, the life inside began to rearrange itself without my consent. The walls that had promised sanctuary now pressed in on me. The floorboards, once steady under my steps, creaked as if they carried the secrets of every door I couldn't open. The mortgage bills grew teeth, gnawing at the steady rhythm of my days. And then the quiet betrayal. An email and a phone call and a handful of messages that arrived like raindrops on a window, one by one, asking me to sign away the life I had built with the hands that had never learned to quit. I won't pretend I didn't hear the rumors. People spoke in soft voices about a family arrangement, about a trusted power of attorney that could take care of emergency matters when I wasn't looking. In the beginning, I believed in the benevolence of it all, the idea that someone would stand as guardian, as a shield against the storms of life when I grew weary. But what I didn't see was that every promise hides a ledger of costs. And the cost in this story is not merely money. It's memory. It's the home you've built brick by brick with your own heartbeat. If you've never watched your life tilt and then tilt again, let me tell you what it feels like. A cold rush up your spine when you realize that the very hands that would cradle you are the hands that may be ready to close doors you once kept open. I signed the documents in a lawyer's office with the same calm you use when you steady a sob in public. I told myself, this is for the better. This is just a formality. This is necessary. The first sign that something was off didn't arrive with a loud crash. It arrived with a whisper. The whisper of a plan that sounded so reasonable you let your fear shrink into a memory. It began with a few small payments, a note tucked into a drawer that asked me to sign here, to agree to something I barely understood. Because the people who love you, your children, say it's fine. And you want to trust them, want to believe the best of them, want to imagine the future you've always promised to give them. But the truth, when it finally lands like a thunderclap, and you realize the storm was not an act of nature but a choice you watched from a distance, a choice you believed was for your protection, not your vulnerability. In that moment, I decided, enough. I would not be a quiet subject in a narrative where others wrote the plot to their advantage. I would reclaim the house that was never really theirs to take in the first place, the life that belonged to me and my own heart. The days after the signed pages felt like stepping into a freezer where every breath fogged in front of me. The house, the one that had promised safety with its marble countertops and quiet corridors, began to sound like a hollow drum, counting down the moments I had left to choose a different drumbeat. I pressed my palms against the kitchen counter and listened to Molly practicing scales in the living room, her voice fluttering between high notes and low fears. Jax rode his bike around the corner, his laughter bouncing off the brick walls as if to remind me that joy still existed beyond the paper I signed. In that moment, I decided I would not erase the rhythm of us to fit a new melody someone else handed us. The letters started arriving with a formal tone and a pinched politeness that felt like a lace glove over a clenched fist. A manager at the mortgage company, a cousin who had become more a rumor than a blessing, a neighbor who claimed to understand the market better than anyone who lived through it. Each envelope carried a subtle threat. Preserve the arrangement, or we'll accelerate what we've already begun, gently, then all at once. I learned there was a name for what was happening to me. Predatory equity, a phrase I'd only heard in whispers from a few who knew the language of power, a language spoken in velvet and steel, where you sign away the life you've built for the illusion of security. They offered a refinance, a careful adjustment, a path to stability, if I would only trust the math and forget the heartbeat behind it. One evening, after Molly had drifted asleep and Jax's toy car squeaked its last wheel on the hallway floor, I walked the rooms with a flashlight, mapping the places where memory lived. The couch imprint where we cried with the first eviction notice. The kitchen tile where Molly learned to count, not just coins but courage. The windows that framed the same street but showed a different life when the sun dipped low and cast a long shadow of what if. That night I did something I hadn't done in years. I listened to my gut instead of the glossy promises. I sat at the table and drew a line in the air, a line between what they said was beneficial and what I knew was survival. The line glowed for a moment, and then I broke it with a decision as simple as it was radical. I would not let a borrowed dream rewrite my truth. The turning point came with a letter from a teacher who had once rented a room in our old neighborhood. She wrote about the power of a home not as property, but as a pulse, a place where you teach your children to dream with both eyes open and one ear tuned to the sound of the street, the other to the heartbeat of possibility. She reminded me that resilience isn't a passive shield but an active choice, a daily act of claiming your space while you still have breath to fight for it. So I began to chart a different course. I contacted a community bank with a reputation for standing with homeowners who refused to let outside help redefine their lives. I gathered every shred of proof I could produce. Old pay stubs, letters from teachers who believed in Molly's music program, a record of late fees paid with a stubborn grace, and the quiet, stubborn love that refused to be priced out of existence. The plan was simple. Reframe the situation not as a battle against the mortgage, but as a fight for the story we want to tell at the dinner table, at the bus stop, on the sidewalks where we learned to run and ride. We would rebuild, not by erasing the past, but by rewriting the terms in a way that honored it. I would teach Molly and Jax to read the ledger of their own lives, how to separate the noise from the truth, how to recognize when someone offers a hand up and when they are merely laying a trap with a friendly smile. But every plan needs a hinge, an event strong enough to swing the door open rather than push it closed. For me, that hinge came in the form of a quiet confrontation with the cousin who had once promised us a better future. We met at the corner cafe where the city's hum softened into a lullaby, 3 tables away from the bar where the old men argued about weather and wages. He spoke with the same practiced smoothness, listing numbers and assurances like a preacher naming blessings. I listened, and when he finished, I looked him in the eyes and spoke the truth I had kept tucked away. I would not trade my children's trust for a piece of a larger address, not while the price was the erasure of who we are. The moment I spoke, a silence fell between us that felt heavier than the debt we carried. The air itself seemed to exhale, letting us see the consequences clearly. The life I was being asked to sign away wasn't just mine to sell. It belonged to Molly's childhood, to Jax's laughter in the hall, to the grandmother who saved every grocery receipt and whispered prayers over our meals. It belonged to a neighborhood that remembered our names and welcomed us to a story we hadn't finished writing. The day the plan shifted from thought to action began with a rain that sounded like distant drumming on the roof. Water beads ran down the window panes, tracing paths that looked like tiny maps of the life I refused to abandon. I stood at the kitchen sink, hands still damp from washing dishes I hadn't had time to finish because Molly had risen earlier than usual, singing softly to herself as if the dawn deserved a private concert. We had a new rhythm now, a schedule that honored our needs rather than the appetite of a system that thrived on urgency. I arranged a calendar on the wall, color-coded with chores, school meetings, and evenings of small, deliberate acts. Family dinners where the world's noise faded to a manageable hum. Homework sessions where Molly discovered how to turn stubborn questions into brave answers. And mornings where Jax's sneakers squeaked on the floor and reminded us we were still moving forward. The bank became our new ally, not a distant wall of numbers. I met with Ms. Rivera, a loan officer whose eyes carried the calm of someone who'd seen many storms and chosen to stand in their rain anyway. She listened first, asked questions second, and offered a path that felt like a real door rather than a mirage. We applied for a refinancing option that valued the life we'd built, not the speed at which we could be ushered out of it. The terms were strict, the process slow, but it was a map with clear landmarks. Proof of income, a history of on-time payments, a willingness to live within our means while protecting what mattered most, our family's heartbeat. Meanwhile, the echo of the cousin's words lingered, not as a threat, but as a reminder of what we were up against. He spoke of leverage and leverage's cousin, inevitability, as if fate had a ledger and we were in line to be balanced out. I learned to hear the subtext of every sentence. The way a compliment can hide a warning, the way a smile can cloak a directive. This awareness didn't sour me, it sharpened me. If they wanted to play cards, I would learn the deck, the rules, and the quietly swinging hinge in the back that could pivot the entire game. I taught Molly to see money not as a shield, but as a tool, something you use with intention, not something that uses you. We practiced telling the truth about needs. A new jacket for winter, a field trip for her music class, a repaired bicycle chain that kept Jax's eyes bright with possibility. We budgeted for small joys. A movie night with popcorn that tasted like courage, a park visit after a long week when the city's noise finally paused long enough for us to breathe together. Concurrently, I uncovered a separate thread of our story, the power of community. Our old neighbors found each other in the same hallways we'd once walked hand in hand. The auntie who taught Molly a new song, the friend who lent us a space to host a small fundraiser for school supplies, the teacher who wrote a letter of support to the bank, describing Molly's dedication to her studies and her music. These voices stitched us back into the fabric of a neighborhood that hadn't forgotten us, even when the headlines threatened to rewrite our memory. The turning point came on a weekend when the rain finally eased and the sun pinned a pale gold glow along the apartment blinds. We held a family meeting at the kitchen table, the same table where we decided to fight for our future. I laid out the plan plainly. Continue the refinancing process, ensure we kept enough liquidity to weather any unexpected storm, and establish a small, transparent reserve fund that would prevent panic from ever seeping back into our lives. Molly drew a picture that became our goal poster. A house with a red door, a yard where a few flowers grew, a sun perched above the corner mailbox, and two figures, Molly and Jax, holding hands, stepping forward together. The plan required courage beyond numbers. A public letter of support from the community, a small fundraiser, and a demonstration of financial responsibility that would quiet the naysayers who believed we were gambling with a dream. I faced the fear not with bravado but with preparation. I gathered testimonies from teachers, colleagues from my earlier work as a caregiver, and former neighbors who remembered how we showed up for one another when it mattered most. I drafted a letter that spoke to the bank in the language of responsibility and humanity, not impulse and desperation. During this stretch, I also confronted the most intimate fear, losing the feeling that I could protect my children from every storm. The old house near the corner store wasn't gone. It was still there in my memory, a beacon of hard-won stability. But as I moved forward, I realized that protection doesn't always mean containment. Sometimes it means choosing a path that invites others to walk alongside you, lending their strength when your own feels too light to carry. The consequences of stepping into this new chapter were not dramatic in a single moment, but cumulative and real. We faced delays, skeptical questions from some faces at the bank, and a few nights where the weight of possibility pressed down on us like a blanket thicker than we could bear. Yet we also felt the slow, steady lift of progress. The approval letters arriving with careful phrases about revisions and progress, the sense of belonging that grew stronger as we stayed true to our plan, and the quiet pride of knowing we were shaping a life that would outlive the moment when the old system tried to erase it. Cider fusion. The day the bank finally sent word that our case was moving from paperwork to action, the air inside our apartment felt charged, like a storm holding its breath just above the skyline. Molly's music practice spilled through the door, a bright, stubborn thread of sound that kept the room from tipping into silence. Jax rode his bike in slow, careful circles, as if he could pace the wind itself and keep it from changing direction. The meeting with the loan supervisor, Ms. Rivera, arrived with a formality that could have cooled the steel in a furnace. She wore a calm that said, "I've done this 100 times, and I've seen heartbreak in the eyes of the hopeful." We sat at the table in her glass-walled office, the city spreading out beneath us like a map of possible futures. I laid out our new plan in plain language, no gloss, no bravado, just the numbers, the ethics, the reasons why this was right for Molly and Jax. Ms. Rivera listened, asked sharp questions, and nodded in ways that suggested she understood the slow work of trust. Then she spoke a sentence that felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning voice. "You're asking for a second chance at something that already exists, a life, a future, a neighborhood memory. We can pursue this with careful oversight, a clear budget, and a commitment to keeping your family intact." Her words didn't erase the fear, but they rearranged its geometry, turning a wall into a doorway. The confrontation I expected with the cousin never quite arrived in the dramatic way I pictured. Instead, it came as a quiet, almost polite exchange in a crowded cafe, where he attempted to frame his push as care, as protection, as a way to secure a better future for Molly. I answered not with heat, but with the steadiness of someone who had learned to measure risk in small, deliberate steps. I told him that love doesn't require a scoreboard or a signature on a dotted line. It requires arms open wide enough to catch when a child runs toward the light, no matter how it flickers. The real turning point arrived when a neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, shared a small, almost invisible piece of courage. She had stood on the edge of the same street where we once felt invisible, watching the world pass, carrying the weight of unspoken stories. She came to our apartment with a plate of fried plantains and a proposal: host a community fundraising event to demonstrate the neighborhood's support for our steadiness, and invite local business people who understood that sustainable neighborhoods are built on relationships, not merely credit scores. The idea wasn't glamorous, but it was powerful. A tangible sign that our life was more than a ledger line. It was a shared story. We embraced her plan. Molly performed a short set with her school choir, the room filling with notes that sounded like home after a long absence. Jax, who had taught himself to ride without training wheels, demonstrated a few tricks to the kids at the event, his laughter piercing the room and reminding everyone that joy is a currency that never depreciates. We spoke from the heart about our values: responsibility, community, and the belief that a neighborhood should be a chorus, not a courtroom. The fundraiser drew small but meaningful crowds. The bakers who donated trays of sweet bread, the local shop owners who matched donations, the teachers who shared the benefits of Molly's music program, and a few bankers who came to listen more than to sell. The room hummed with the kind of energy that makes the air feel lighter, as if the walls themselves agreed to share their secrets in exchange for keeping a family intact. By the time we left the venue, a different mood threaded through us. The bank had seen the turnout, had heard the stories from the community, and had listened to the quiet, stubborn resolve in our voices. They approved a revised plan, a longer-term refinance with protective covenants that would cap any future adjustments, a reserve fund that would grow with time, and regular check-ins to ensure the life we'd built remained the center of gravity for Molly and Jax. The news came like dawn after a night of needing to believe in the possibility of light again. I stood on the steps outside the building, the city waking around me, and felt the heavy weight in my chest loosen its grip just enough to let a steady breath through. I turned to Molly, who had been listening with a seriousness that shouldered more than a child's burden, and whispered, "We did it because we didn't abandon our truth." She pressed her small hand into mine and nodded, as if to say she understood that this victory wasn't just about money or a house. It was about belonging, courage, and the stubborn persistence of a family that refused to disappear into a system that had tried to erase them. As night settled again over the city, I reflected on the cost of the path we walked. It wasn't without pain. Some days the old fear crept back in, reminding me of the moments when I'd believed I had to hide parts of myself to keep us safe. But the cost also included a new kind of freedom, the freedom to demand honesty, to invite community into our corner of the world, and to teach Molly and Jax a critical lesson. That a life of dignity isn't given by anyone else, it is claimed with a steady, unyielding voice. The last page of the calendar flipped to a quiet month, the kind where the air feels lighter because a storm has finally moved on. Our home no longer felt like a fortress under siege. It felt like a small harbor where we could unfurl our sails again and choose our course with intention. The refinance terms stood as a quiet beacon, not a lighthouse that cackled with arrogance, but a steady guidepost that reminded us to steer with care and courage. Molly's world expanded in the most human way possible. She learned that a city's money is not a monster to fear, but a tool to shape the future you want to see. She wrote a new song for the school concert. Lyrics about roots, roots that hold fast when winds rise, and branches that bend without breaking. Jax, who had learned to ride without training wheels, began to mentor younger kids in the neighborhood, teaching them to balance not just on wheels, but on the tightrope of choices that come with growing up in a place where every door looks like a potential trap or a doorway. I returned to the practice of looking at the walls not as constraints, but as canvases. The kitchen window, once a frame for anxiety, became a frame for possibility. A tree outside, its leaves catching the late afternoon sun. The street below, alive with conversations and the soft thud of basketballs. The distant skyline that reminded us we were part of something larger than our fears. I started writing again, not for others to read, but for us to hear the truth of our own voice. How it sounded when spoken with conviction, how it sounded when softened by love, how it sounded when it learned to forgive without forgetting. The neighborhood hadn't forgotten us either. People who once watched from the periphery began to step closer, bringing little acts of solidarity. Someone offered to carpool Molly to rehearsals. Another shared a lead on a small grant for neighborhood kids' arts programs. A local baker saved a weekly Saturday space for a community gathering where stories could be told and recipes shared. It wasn't a miracle in a single moment, but a chorus forming, note by note, person by person, week by week. The question that remained, what makes a home truly safe, became less about walls and more about people. Safety became a choose to stand together, a decision to shield one another even when the system tried to pull us apart. It meant speaking up when a neighbor's child faced a subtle form of discrimination during a school event and finding the right words to protect that young voice without creating more distance. It meant voting, volunteering, and reminding ourselves that political and communal power are not distant abstractions but everyday acts that shape the air we breathe. In the end, the house remained a home not because it was flawless or perfectly quiet, but because we refused to abandon the living rhythm that had brought us there. The breath of Molly's song, the steady crank of Jax's wheels, the music of the city's early morning and late night, all weaving together into a reassurance that our presence mattered. We had survived not by denying pain, but by transforming it into purpose. We had learned that resilience is less about toughness and more about tenderness. Tender enough to listen, to adjust, to forgive, and to fight for what is right without turning cruelty into a weapon. As I stood at the threshold one evening, watching the sun spill gold across the porch, I thought about the journey that brought us here. The path wasn't clean or linear, but it was ours. It was a map drawn with imperfect lines, but the compass we trusted was unshakable. Love for Molly, love for Jax, and a shared belief that a community that protects its own is a community that can weather any forecast. A home isn't a trophy won by chance. It's a promise kept through courage, community, and the willingness to rewrite the terms of what secure really means. If this story moved you, please subscribe for more narratives that center resilience, heart, and the power of collective care. Your support helps shine a light on voices that deserve to be heard.